Whenever Jean and I combine a visit to our son David, who lives in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, with a trip to see my parents who are in southern Indiana, the route we go often takes us through the state of West Virginia. Have you been to West Virginia? Anybody from West Virginia? All right. West Virginia to me is a paradox. It is this place of incredibly beautiful mountains, almost heaven, West Virginia, Blue Ridge Mountains. And very friendly people. But it is also a state of severe rural poverty and a dingy grime that seems to cover almost everything there that comes along with mining coal. One year while we were passing through the area of West Virginia, the news was not good for the people there. When the water supply for a good portion of the state, 9 counties, was discovered to be contaminated by a chemical spill. The story on CNN said nearly 200,000 people in West Virginia awoke Friday to stark warnings about their tap water. Don't drink it, don't cook with it, don't even brush your teeth or take a shower in it. The reason? A chemical spill in the Elk River in the central and southwestern parts of the state, and the news sent shockwaves throughout the region as worried folks headed to hospitals in search of reassurance that they were okay. Now, authorities did not help the shock by saying there was no process for cleaning up the spill other than letting the chemical dissipate over time. As would be expected, store shelves quickly emptied of bottled water in the affected areas, and the best solution offered was the hope that West Virginians in the unaffected areas would practice good neighborliness and begin collecting water to share with those who had no clean water. Of course, this past year, you may remember it was discovered that the water supply of the city of Flint, Michigan, was found to be filled with poison chemicals that residents had been ingesting and bathing in for who knows how long. Water is one of those essential things in life we take for granted, don't we? We take it for granted and don't really think about it until we don't have it. Now, some of you know what it's like to live without easy access to water, right? A while back, by oversight, I failed to pay our water bill on time. And we came home to no water. The very night Jean wanted to cook a turkey and dressing for her work Thanksgiving party the next day. Now, let me say about the water company where we get our water, Hammond Water, they will forgive you the first time you fail to pay your bill and turn the water back on without charging a reconnect fee. But the second time you do it, they don't, I found out. I don't know how many times over the few hours we were waterless that I went by the sink to turn on the faucet. Oh yeah, no water. One commentator on our scripture story for today that Robert read captured the essential nature of water to our lives with this description. He said, water is one of the most powerful elements on the face of the planet. The flow of water over the ground for an extended period of time will result in a riverbed, and possibly over a significant enough period of time, a river valley. Water, it's important to industry, to fishing, to recreation, to boundaries, to crop irrigation, to transportation routes. In homes, water is used for cleaning and bathing and preparing meals. Our body weight is made up of about 60% water. Our health and survival is determined in many ways by water and hydration. And science and experience has shown us that a person can survive for about 3 weeks without food but for only 3 days at most without water. We need water for life. Water is powerful and yet it's fragile at the same time. 70% of the earth is covered by water, and it's one of the most important natural resources that we have. And the lack of availability of clean water is one of the causes of poverty and disease all around the world today. Questions related to water rights and pollution are part of the modern ecological movement. Water is vital to the sustenance of humans and animals and vegetation. Care for the Earth's water supply is essential to the continued survival of the planet. Water was certainly an important topic in the Bible and in the lives of the people the Bible describes. For water is there from the creation story on. Both lack of water in the desert and the destructive power of water in the flood occupy a good bit of the biblical story time. Water in the Bible is both a gift and a curse at times. It is no surprise that when the great characters of faith want to convey their strongest points, water is often the symbol through which they choose to communicate. In today's scripture story and on this day, in the Christian calendar, water has a primary role. For this is the baptism of Jesus Day. And our story begins and brings us to the edge of the Jordan River as observers of the baptism of Jesus himself. A couple of things about this event may strike us as odd. First is the body of water itself, the Jordan River. Anyone been there? I once led a study in my previous churches entitled Walking in the Footsteps of Jesus, where by video we visited several sites in the life of Jesus, and the most surprising of all the locations to me was the Jordan River. I'd always had in my mind, as I pictured Jesus' baptism and all the people gathered there that were baptized that day with him, I had in my mind something akin to the Ohio or the mighty Mississippi. But the Jordan River is more like what we might call a creek. It's a muddy creek at that. Jesus was baptized in a muddy creek. The first baptism that I performed as a pastor back in my days as a Baptist was held at a campground in what was called a lake, but it was really more like a large pond. I'll never forget the feel of the mud and the silt squishing through my toes as I walked down into the water, and I was so very nervous. And the baptismal candidates that day were a brother and a sister, ages 78 and 74. The brother was quite tall, and so a part of my prayer that day, not that I said it aloud, was, "Please, Lord, help me not to lose my footing and drop this man." There is something to be said for the logistical simplicity of sprinkling. Let me say. The preacher doesn't have to put on waders, and the candidate doesn't have to worry about changing clothes before they come back to the worship service. But there's also, though, something to be said for the earthiness and the edginess of out-of-doors immersion baptism. If baptism is truly the symbolic entry into the way of God, a life of following Christ, then perhaps it ought to give us a little sense of edginess. Perhaps one of the greatest mistakes we've made in modern Christianity is this notion that to follow Christ is mostly about safety. It's like an insurance policy, removing all the risk from our lives, when quite the opposite may be true. To follow Christ in this life is about going to the edge, about putting our lives on the line. It's a joyous adventure amid real sacrifice. The other odd thing about our scripture story today is voiced by John the Baptist himself, when he says, "Jesus, why are you here? This is not right, Jesus. I should not be baptizing you. You ought to be baptizing me." What is Jesus doing here anyway, in line with all the rest of sinful humanity who need to be cleansed of unrighteousness? I mean, Jesus does not need this, for Jesus lives within the perfect will of the Father. What is he doing here? It sort of upsets John the Baptist that he's here. It certainly upset the good religious folks of his day that Jesus got down into the mud, as they say. He hung around the wrong crowd, and his closest followers were all the time failing to follow the proper policies and procedures. Even Jesus himself healed on the Sabbath, when the Holy Book makes it quite clear that to do so violates the rules. Jesus, remember, chose to perform his first miracle not in the surroundings of a designated holy place, but at a wedding reception when he turned water into an alcoholic beverage. Some of you would like to know that trick. The fact that Jesus was out at the River Jordan makes a statement that Jesus is aligning himself with the ministry of John the Baptist, that rabble-rousing, locust and honey-eating desert preacher who was calling people to make dramatic changes in their lives. Jesus aligns with John the Baptist over and against the institutional religious hierarchy. The stage is being set for his journey to Jerusalem. And what is likely to happen there? An arrest. A sham of a conviction. A ridiculous sentence. And a horrible end. What is Jesus doing here? Submitting to the waters of baptism. In a desert environment, water is the surest sign of life. Without water, there is no hope for tomorrow. Water quenches thirst, and it cleanses away the filth which can ultimately smother. Jesus comes to the water because Jesus is the water of life. And when he rises out of the muddy Jordan River, the scripture writer tells us that a voice from heaven declares, Jesus is the beloved one with whom the Father is always well pleased. Experience should have taught us, but we stubborn humans oftentimes just don't get it. We have a thirst that will not be quenched, and we are covered with a filth that will not be cleansed except by the one true living water. And where do we find that living water? That was the question which the woman at the well had. Remember her? There she was at the well of Jericho with all that water, and yet she was thirsty and unclean. And Jesus makes her an offer of living water that will satisfy like no other. Jesus offers us the same. Living water. A relationship with the living God. Do we want it? What are we willing to sacrifice for it? Jean and I have been trying lately to do some personal budget cutting. Asking ourselves the question, what can we do without? You ever ask yourself that question? What can I do without? Oh, sometimes don't we look at the things in our lives and we think, I just simply cannot do without that. Can't do without Netflix, right? We are. There's so many things we think we cannot do without. But then we go a few hours without access to water, and our thinking changes. And we think, you know what, I can do without that. But I've got to have water. We need water. Living water. Water for life. We need a relationship with God. For in the end, that's all that matters. Would you pray? Like the woman at the well, we are seeking. For things, oftentimes trying things that will not satisfy. Fill our cup, Lord. Fill it up. Make us whole. Quench this thirsting of our souls with your living water. That's our hope and desire this day, God. Deliver us from all that would keep us from coming to the true source of that living water this day. In Jesus' name.